All right, here we are, another week, another great discussion. Doing this the morning after. To digest. It was a lot of talking about the effects of colonialization still being an agenda tied to education, especially because the roots of education in the developing world are tied to colonialization. In particular, I found that really interesting to learn about as I have an interest in the history of Rwanda and how essentially certain classes or the different tribes were set up um, by the colonial rulers as like you're the going to be the educated class that's going to do the civil servant work, and the other group is going to be the farmer poorer class. So the colonizers kind of set up the education system for the Tutsi to be the middle class worker established in the country, and the Hutu to be the poorer, necessary in the capitalist system to the poorer class. So it was interesting that kind of across Africa and the developing world, that education kind of initially existed to teach the local population the skills needed to do low level civil service work to make the colony function properly. And of course, with the end of colonialization and independence among African and Latin American countries, you still have the same westernized education system in place, kind of still reinforcing these values. So while we're not directly colonial empires, I mean, some would argue that, but we're not actively in the region as colonial forces. The neo-colonialism is being kind of pushed through education agendas. That was a very interesting topic of discussion today. Another thing we talked about was how the educational system kind of doesn't prepare people for the Western society of the education they're receiving, and then it in turn alienates them from their own society by, preparing them for work that they can't do. I can personally speak to this as my time in Burkina Faso. I know unemployment among people with college degrees was upwards of 40%. And there was huge student protest of, they wanted to better themselves, get education. And then on the other side of university, there's no work for them. And so now there's these very educated class kind of alienated from the village life by chasing the education, and they don't have a niche to fill. And meanwhile, they aren't being, those who do leave the country via brain drain kind of don't come back. But otherwise, the West isn't accepting all these educated people. So they're not, fit for Western society. They're not fit for village society, all because they chased the dreams of education. So it was an interesting concept to struggle with because of the merits of education, but to see these negative impacts was a very interesting thing to discuss. So a lot of interesting readings. Looking forward to next week as always, and we'll see you next time.